Through Fire and Water. The Life of Reb Noson of Breslov. Part 3, by the Rebbe. Chapter 10, A Little is Also Good. The year Taf Kuf Samach Daled, 1803 to 1804, Reb Noson's second year with Rebbe Nachman, was marked by an increase in the pressures on the Jews living under Russian rule. That winter saw the enactment of the notorious Statute Concerning the Jews, which was intended to effect nothing less than the total transformation of Jewish social, economic, and cultural life, so as to undermine the status of the Jews as a group set apart from the rest of society. More immediately, it aimed a devastating blow at the economic basis of Jewish life, with its requirement that by 1808, the Jews move away from the rural areas they had lived in for centuries, where they made their living by managing the estates of the nobility and running roadside inns. The Chassidic community suffered its own loss in the winter of that year with the passing of Reb Gedalia of Linitz, a major disciple of Reb Yehuda Leib of Polnoi, who was leading follower of the Baal Shem Tov. The loss of Reb Gedalia was felt particularly strongly by the Breslov Chassidim, since he had given his support to Rebbe Nachman in face of the attacks of the Shpala Zayda. The latter owed most of his credibility to the fact that he was the oldest surviving chassid of that generation to have been with the Baal Shem Tov. The passing of other leading Chassidic masters would naturally seem to enhance his authority. That same winter, one of Rebbe Nachman's closest followers, Reb Yitzchak Isaac of Teravitza, passed away. The Rebbe said of him that he was a true Talmud Chacham. Reb Yitzchak Isaac was sorely missed by the Breslover Chassidim, though when they told the Rebbe this, he consoled them by saying, "But today, we have Reb Noson." Reb Noson had his own share of tragedy that year with the passing of his mother, Chayalana, on Thursday, the 2nd of Kislev, Tuf Kuf Samach Daled, November 17th, 1803. One day after his son Shachna's first birthday, Reb Noson said Kaddish for the customary 11 months. On the other hand, the new financial arrangements made on the initiative of his father's business partners enabled Reb Noson to devote all his time to his Torah study and devotions. Esther Shendel was now putting less pressure on him after her father's admonition to be supportive of such a diligent student. In addition, Reb Noson was living in his own home, and this greatly reduced the opposition he had to face from his family. He was thus free to travel to the Rebbe at least once every few weeks. Reb Noson settled into what was to be his routine for some time to come. It consisted of a rich diet of Mishnah, Talmud, and the codes, Shulchan Aruch, as well as his other studies, including first and foremost the teachings of Rebbe Nachman. Reb Noson writes that before his attachment to the Rebbe, he was distant from real learning. "I wanted to be one of the Masmidim, but I didn't succeed. I would come to the Beis Medrash, but it only took one small obstacle, and I couldn't even start the day. That entire day would end up being wasted. I told myself I would start learning tomorrow, but when tomorrow arrived, something else would come up, and I would push off learning until the next day. There came a time when I fell into despair, and I became a total idler." Remember, this is from a very diligent and learned student. So, one of the most important lessons Rebbe Nachman taught Reb Noson was that a little is also good. One should grab it and be content with it. When one knows one will be faced with interruptions, one should break one's study program into shorter, more manageable sessions. This advice helped Reb Noson become an even better student than he already was. Even when he encountered disturbances, he knew that every single bit goes a long way. A little is also good. He would study that little bit, and then more and more. So I climbed out of my despair and became diligent and productive in learning. The Rebbe also taught Reb Noson that one does not have to stick to a single page until one has mastered every detail. It frequently happens that one comes up with questions that one cannot resolve immediately. People often waste much valuable time by entering into a long, vain search for the answer, and even come to despise their learning as a result. Study a lot, the Rebbe taught, and the broad knowledge you acquire will help you understand later what you couldn't grasp now. After all, the Torah is poor here but rich elsewhere. Aniya b'makom echad v'ashira b'makom acher. The next time around, more likely than not, one would easily see the answers to the problems one had marked. Yet, Reb Noson still became very discouraged when he found himself unable to complete his regimen of learning. He writes, I was very upset about this, but when I spoke to the Rebbe about it, he comforted me, saying, surely this is something unique to us, that we want to finish everything promptly. As far as the rest of the world is concerned, they can spend 3 or 4 years on futility and get nothing at all for their labor. What he wanted to convey was that one should never try to force the issue, no matter how much one may want to finish everything at once. If one sees that it is impossible and that obstacles are springing up on every side, one should not allow oneself to be thrown off course. One should calmly do whatever one can, hoping and waiting for God's help until in the end one will succeed in completing the task. Anyone who genuinely wants to will to be able to derive read that wrong. Anyone who genuinely wants to will be able to derive much guidance and encouragement as to how to serve God determinedly and vigorously, while at the same time never trying to force matters or allowing himself to be thrown off course if things do not go his way. One should always be patient and wait and wait and wait until God looks down from heaven and sees. With thanks to God, this advice has helped me greatly. And I still confidently await God's help because I know that God will eventually complete things for me. The Rebbe's simple, straightforward advice guided Reb Noson in his other devotions as well. He writes, once I was speaking with him about the confusion and depression I suffered in connection with carrying out certain mitzvahs, such as washing my hands before bread. I would have all kinds of doubts about whether I had adequately fulfilled my obligation. I've already told you, the Rebbe replied, that you should pay no attention whatever to such thoughts. I spoke to him a great deal about these problems, and I told him that the very fact that I knew I shouldn't pay attention to such thoughts was itself a source of anxiety. His reply was, don't start thinking at all. This is a remarkable piece of advice which applies in all areas of life. It so often happens that people are overwhelmed by confusing thoughts. The more they try to put them out of their minds, the more insistent the thoughts become. The best approach is not to start dwelling on them at all. One should ignore them completely and simply do one's part and carry on with what one is doing. On another occasion, I had been complaining to the Rebbe about my personal problems, and I said to him bitterly, I'm worn out from crying, my throat is hoarse, my eyes are spent from hoping for God. This is a pasuk in Tehillim we quoted. Trying to remember how it goes in Hebrew. Nicha groini einai kalu miachal elokai. Something like that. The Rebbe said gently, if so, what is there to do? For it is forbidden to question the ways of God, and God is surely righteous. Then he said to me, if King David said, I'm worn out from crying, my throat is hoarse, surely he meant it quite literally. He had already cried out so much that he was physically exhausted and his throat was literally hoarse. But you, thank God, you still have your strength. The Rebbe also shared some of his own problems with Reb Noson, and this too was a source of encouragement to him. On one occasion that year, the Rebbe told Reb Noson, I cried bitterly this past Friday night. Why is it that everything I do has to be so difficult? He said that each day when he got up, he found it impossible even to open his mouth, and he could not stir himself to pray. Reb Noson was totally amazed by this. He writes, an awesomely holy tzaddik such as the Rebbe had to make such an effort with every prayer and holy deed. He had to confront the most serious obstacles before doing anything. Then how much more must people like ourselves do everything in our power to force ourselves when it comes to religious devotion and especially prayer? We must struggle, toil, and push ourselves day by day. Even though this is something people find very onerous, we have to use all our energy and force ourselves in the hope that we might be able to utter even a few words of true prayer. Shortly after Hanukkah that year, December of 1803, Rebbe Nachman told Reb Noson to increase his study of the Shulchan Aruch. The Rebbe was priming him to begin writing his own original Torah discourses, in which he used the Rebbe's lessons to illumine the laws of the Shulchan Aruch. The Rebbe suggested that he cover 5 pages of the Shulchan Aruch with its commentaries each day, so that he would finish the entire work within a year. Rebbe Nachman apparently wanted him to have a special familiarity with the codes, and therefore instructed him to study them at a very fast pace. Reb Noson was able to keep this up for about half a year, in which he completed Chaim and most of Yeridea, but afterwards he encountered various obstacles and was forced to slow his pace. Reb Noson's learning schedule was so heavy that he found himself hard-pressed to keep up with it. But even so, the Rebbe told him that he must also make time to talk to people every day. Perhaps this was also connected with his future role, as he needed to be able to communicate with people. It was also a way of resting his mind from his intense learning. Even so, Reb Noson was perplexed. He asked the Rebbe, "Should I talk with them about serving God?" "Yes." "But I don't know what's bothering the other person." "You don't need to know." "Then in what way am I of any help to him?" "What concern is that of yours?" said the Rebbe. Reb Noson then understood that the Rebbe meant that whenever someone speaks to another person about serving God, he always accomplishes something. Once, during the summer of 1804, Reb Noson felt compelled to travel to Breslov. He went together with his friend, Reb Naftali. The Rebbe said to Reb Noson, "I brought you here because I wanted to tell you to begin a new devotion. I want you to start studying the Chaim." That's the main work of the Arizal's Kabbalah. Reb Noson said to him, "What if I don't understand?" The Rebbe replied, "Study. Where you don't understand, make a mark. The second time you review it, you'll see that you can erase some marks. So it will be every time until eventually you will have erased all the marks." Embarking on a serious study of the Kabbalah was an important step in Reb Noson's development. Shortly before he had first become attached to Rebbe Nachman, the Rebbe had said he was longing for a follower who would be both learned and gifted with an outstanding power of language. Then he would be able to explain the writings of the Raice so clearly that even young people who know how to pick up a book and understand it would be able to learn and understand all the writings of the Arizal.